Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the State of Georgia versus Christopher Wolfenbarger. It's been 27 years since 1998. And specifically, December of 1998. That was the last time that Melissa Wolfenbarger was ever heard from. At that point, in 1998, Melissa Wolfenbarger was 21 years of age. She was married, had 2 children, had a mother, sister, and after 1998, December, neither one of them ever received a phone call, not a visit, not a card. Not after Christmas of 1998. Not after her mother's birthday in 1999 in February. So you're going to hear that Melissa, at the age of 21, she had experiences when she was a child when she would run away from home. She had experiences during her adulthood after she married this defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger, when she would not talk to her sister for a period of time. But she would always keep in touch with her mother. Most importantly, she never let a holiday go by without calling or visiting. In November of 1998, Melissa had the intent to visit her mother for Thanksgiving. And they spoke. One of the things that Melissa was really looking forward to was getting a photograph of her pawpaw, her grandfather, the father of Carl Patton, Melissa's grandfather. And that is Carl Patton, Melissa's father. And that is the husband of Norma Patton. She wanted that photo. And Norma Patton expected that at some point between Thanksgiving, even though she didn't get an opportunity to go visit her mom, that she would get that photograph. Well, when Christmas came around, she was concerned when she didn't hear from her, but by the time she got to February, she knew something was wrong. Melissa never would let that much time go without talking to her mom, not especially during that period of time, not on her birthday. Well, it took some time for authorities to be alerted, because you're going to hear that Melissa wasn't reported missing until January of 2000. And that was because this defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger, you're going to hear from his own words. You're going to hear what he told the detectives, what he told his children. He never looked for her. He never reported her missing. So when Norma Patton and Tina Patton are looking for Melissa, where is she? She's not working anymore. She worked at Waffle House. She's not showing up to her job. She's not looking after her children. She's not checking on her children. No word. Well, the authorities tell them that, well, Melissa is 21. She's married. She's got her own life. If she hasn't called you, then maybe she doesn't want to talk to you. Her husband hadn't reported her missing. And you hadn't talked to her in a month. Well, not really much for us to do right now. But eventually, Melissa's mother goes to Henry County, and they start an investigation. But even though they talk to friends and family, they even talk to Christopher. And all they get from him is she just left. That's it. That goes on for 3 years. She gets unidentified for 3 years. And that takes us to really when we locate the remains of Melissa Wolfenbarger. They were located on 2 different days. April 29th and June 3rd of 1999. Now, April 29th, George McKeitry is driving on the area and heard questions about Avon Avenue. That location is the location of Action Glass Company. You're going to hear that is the location where Christopher Wolfenbarger worked. The glass company, kind of a manufacturing plant. They have industrial equipment at this location. That's where he works. Although they had no reason to think that that was anything significant at the time, because in April 29th of 1999, all they knew was that there was a head in the roadway, partially, fully, very much fully decomposed. And Mr. McKeitry George McKeitry is driving in that area on Avon Avenue, and he sees something that he thinks is kind of odd. So he stops and looks at it, goes and gets his daughter, and comes back, and he can see what clearly is a human head. Now, something that he would tell you he couldn't believe with his own eyes, or he couldn't believe. Well, that begins the discovery and really the process of trying to identify that skull. That's those same detective, the lead detective at that time was Dale Kelly. You're going to hear from the Fulton County Medical Examiners, investigators, Tina Miller. They were all out there at that location on Avon Avenue on April 29, 1999, collecting evidence, taking photographs, some of which you'll see. But ultimately, they start looking for information on who this could belong to. Then you find the extremities on June 3rd, 1999. That these extremities are found, everything but the torso. So everything but the midsection of Melissa Wolfenbarger is located. Femurs, and you'll hear from the detectives, you'll hear from the medical examiners. When the skull was found, they had a portion of the spine attached to the skull, and it appeared as though it had been severed or removed with some type of circular saw. The extremities were examined. Detectives, medical examiners, the anthropologists who worked for the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, they observed signs of 2 marks. The anthropologist describes the different lines on the bones as what happens when a saw is attempting to catch a groove and actually make a cut. You'll see the bones where there's the saw marks on the finger of Melissa Wolfenbarger. You will see the end of the finger where it appears as though you see ridges on the bone where that saw cut. But even on June 3rd of 1999, they didn't even have these cases connected. They were found about 50, 60 feet from each other in that same area. They didn't have a basis to connect it to, so they were in the medical examiner's office as 2 separate case files. Skull found on Avon Avenue. And extremities found almost 2 months later on Avon Avenue. They suspected that the cases may be connected, but they didn't have what you needed to actually combine and connect the cases and say that they were the same person. But what do you do at the beginning of a homicide investigation? The first thing that law enforcement does, especially when there's evidence of foul play, as in this case, when you find out who the victim is, who the person is, you go look at their background. And what did they find when they looked at what Melissa's life was like when she was alive in 97, 98? Who was she talking with? Did she have conflict with them? Is she married? What was her marriage like? Were there instances of abuse in the marriage? Had her husband ever been charged with anything related to that abuse, like hitting her? They looked at that information, and I'll tell you that at the time they did find the identity and were able to determine the identity of skull and extremities, Christopher Wolfenbarger was the primary suspect. I'll just tell you that. He was the person, the main person that they were looking at. He wasn't the only person, because you got to conduct a thorough sifting investigation, but they had evidence that Christopher and Melissa were involved in a tumultuous relationship, that Christopher was abusive, that he had struck her on multiple occasions. They had evidence that he had caused a black eye, that she had witnesses that observed bruises on her neck. They had evidence that at some point Melissa applied for a protective order to prevent contact with this defendant. You're also going to hear that on the day that Christopher was ordered to come to court, March 29th, ordered to come to court on July 29th of 1998, you're going to see that same day, Melissa appeared and requested for that case to be dismissed. Roughly 7-8 days after she was hit, 7 days after she went personally and applied for a protective order, 7 days after that, she goes back down to the courthouse and asks for it to be dismissed. I don't want to prosecute it. You're going to hear from a lot of witnesses in this case. You're also going to hear from a domestic violence expert. And that domestic violence expert will be able to explain that that is not uncommon at all. The victims of domestic violence to come back and say, I don't want to prosecute. And you're going to hear about some of the reasons why that can happen. And that was the 21st of July, 1998. Officer Marlon Sutton responded to the residence at 824 Brookline Street in Atlanta. That was marital residence of Christopher and Melissa Wolfenbarger, the family owned home of the Wolfenbarger family that Christopher and Melissa were staying in at the time. When Marlon Sutton arrived at that location, it was a response to a domestic violence incident. And when he arrived, he got an opportunity to view Melissa Wolfenbarger and see her in person. What he observed was someone that had bruises, someone that had been attacked, someone that was hysterical and afraid. He didn't see Christopher there that day, though. He wasn't there, he left. So she was instructed to do as she did. You don't feel safe, go and apply for a protective order, which is what she did very much day. You want to see those documents July 29th. The day after this, she goes down and applies for that protective order. By the time this case comes up, on March 1999, you'll see this document in particular, state court documents, actually filing the formal charge of battery against this defendant, 1998. By the time it comes to the court, they can't find Melissa. Can't find her in March 1999. No way of knowing a month and a half later, her head was found in front of his job And I'm going to say this too, less than a minute drive from his house in walking distance. You got this decomposing head, April 29th, in front of the job at Avon Avenue. And you got the location of Avon Avenue itself. So this is the Action Glass Company location right here. So this is where Christopher Wolfenbarger worked. You'll see this map, and witnesses will explain. Witnesses that were at this location in April of '99 when her head was located. You'll see on the photographs there will be a sewer here, and you'll see where her head is located here. Within about 120 feet from this job. And then in June, you'll see where the extremities, the sawed-off legs of Melissa Wolfenbarger are found in this area. The detectives will tell you when they examined the location, it appeared as though they saw an animal carrying a bag right where the head was located, from this area out onto Avon Avenue. So when they were able to make the connection, they come back with cadaver dogs, and they go back and look in this area, and that's how they find the extremities. That's how they find the June 3rd, 1999 legs, remaining parts to be found. And we never found her torso, the remaining parts to be found in this walk. And to give you a perspective of where its job is and where Brookline Street is, this is Action Glass. This is the junkyard where the extremities were found. Here is the location of the sewer where her head was found. And less than a minute drive is Brookline Street where Melissa and Christopher Wolfenbarger reside. Now, in 1999, you don't have the Atlanta Beltline. You don't have these buildings. This area is primarily wooded. But that is the location and the proximity of Christopher Wolfenbarger's job to where his wife's head was found, to where his wife's legs were found, and where they lived. This is a case about domestic violence. In addition to the evidence of the physical bruises on the person of Melissa Wolfenbarger, you're going to hear from her family. Her mother knew about the July 1998 attack. Melissa told her about it. She told her mother how Christopher was upset, wanted her to come back, and how he struck her in the face, how he grabbed her and dragged her by the hair. Nobody was arrested. Her mother was one of the persons that she told about that July incident. You're also going to hear from her sister, Tina Patton, who occasionally worked. Well, one time in particular in 1998, there was a 2 or 3 month period where Tina Patton, Melissa's sister, worked at a Waffle House. I believe it was Virginia Avenue Waffle House. They worked at a few Waffle Houses that year. Melissa didn't even take her. But during that period, in the early part of 1998, Melissa and Tina Patton worked at the Waffle House. And she would tell you that there was one day that she observed while she was working with Melissa during that period, she observed marks on the neck of Melissa, around the sides, and she knew immediately it looked, and she'll tell you this, it looked like someone had choked Melissa. And Melissa told her that Defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger. And You're going to hear from a man that Melissa was seeing right when she died. You're going to hear that Melissa planned on leaving this defendant. You're going to hear from his own mouth that they weren't on good terms when she left, when she went missing. Thomas Dixon was also working at a Waffle House when he met Melissa Wolfenbarger. And towards the end of 1998, they started seeing each other. And at one point, Melissa was staying in a lodge or hotel with Thomas Dixon. And he'll tell you that he was fully aware that she was with this defendant, Christopher Wolfenbarger, but he'll tell you that she wanted to leave. And then during that week, she was staying with him. She fully planned on doing that, but decided to go back to him, to Christopher in particular, to see her children. She missed them. And Thomas Dixon will tell you that the last time he saw Melissa Wolfenbarger, Christopher Wolfenbarger came up to that Waffle House. Melissa and Christopher had a talk, and Melissa got hysterical. She started crying. Thomas Dixon will tell you that he went outside to talk to Christopher and told him that he has to leave until 9 o'clock, and she did so. You're going to hear Thomas Dixon tell you that when Christopher left, he peeled out in his Volkswagen, and that was the last time he saw Melissa. He'll tell you that she never came back to work at Waffle House. She never called. She never texted. And that is the evidence to show that that's consistent with what you'll hear from her mother and sister regarding the last time anyone ever saw her. And as I said, she goes unidentified for 3 years. During this period, the medical examiner that is working in Fulton County is also working in Twiggs County, and is first attempting to determine if a headless corpse that they located in Twiggs County could potentially be connected with this skull they find in Avon over in Atlanta. That was one thing they were looking into. There were several missing persons in and around the state of Georgia that they were attempting to get dental records for and repair. There were tooth extractions that were done during this period, but all in the attempts to find the identity of the person who that skull belonged to. There were attempts to conduct reconstruction. And what further confused it is the anthropologist plots skull dimensions on the scale, and you get a range. And sometimes those ranges overlap. So at some point, they'll tell you that her skull looked like it had been run over, damaged, and she, at some point, the anthropologist thought she could have been the skull of a male. All this was going on during this period from 1999, in April, when they located the skull, June, when they located the extremities. All this is happening during this period, trying to find out who these remains belong to. And ultimately, Melissa doesn't get identified until 2003. And what triggered the identification ultimately is the arrest of Melissa Wolfenbarger's father. You're going to hear that Melissa Wolfenbarger's father essentially pled guilty to committing murder himself, committing multiple murders himself. And when he was arrested, it was a notorious publication, it was a notorious arrest. It garnered a lot of attention. You're going to hear that Carl Patton asked the lead detective when he was arrested, after he confessed, he asked the detective, told him that his daughter was missing for 3 years, he had no leads. He asked if he could find his daughter. detective contacted the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office. We had this unidentified skull they found 3 years ago. And with Carl Patton's statement, they obtained the medical dental records from Melissa Wolfenbarger's dentist, William Grant. Got a pediatric practice in the 80s and 90s. He obtained Melissa's original records, x-rays, and they did Dr. Mary Beth Hopkins, forensic dentist, the medical examiner's office, conducted an examination, looked at the x-rays, looked at the fillings, looked at the dimensions of the teeth, and was able to make a conclusive determination that the skull that was found in April of 1999 was in fact the skull that belonged to Melissa Wolfenbarger, because the dental records matched the impressions that she took from the skull. It was a match. That's when all the location of the job, that's when all the location of the house, the location of the extremities, and the skull between the job, that's when all that comes in. And that's already a suspect. That's when they're really focusing on this. You know what he says? Same thing. She just left. Then he says, oh, well, I dropped off at the train station. You're going to hear those statements from him. And you're going to hear the detectives question him about those statements in that explanation. As I said, the skull was identified by Mary Beth Hopkins. There were two medical examiners during that period in 1998 when we first started, in 1999 when we first started their examinations. Dr. Carol Terry and Dr. Joseph Parker. Dr. Joseph Parker is no longer living, but you will hear from Dr. Carol Terry, who will tell you that she examined the extremities. She'll tell you that she examined the skull and that they appeared to have evidence of tool marks. And she'll tell you that her expert opinion is that Melissa Wolfenbarger was murdered. The circumstances of her lifestyle, how she was living, what was happening to her, the circumstances of her remains, the condition that they were found in, makes it highly likely that she was murdered. That's what she'll tell you. Tina Patton is the sister of Mrs. Wolfenbarger that you will hear from at some point today. Melissa told her that Chris was responsible for the bruises on her neck. You'll hear from Norma Patton, Melissa's mother. She was told about a battery in July of '98. Melissa told her mother that she wanted to leave this defendant. She told him that he was abusive. You'll hear from Thomas Dixon, who was the singer. Probably one of the last persons that Melissa saw. He also has information that he's going to tell you about how abusive this defendant was from Melissa's own mouth. And you're going to hear from Christina Garrett. Christina Garrett is the daughter of Melissa Wolfenbarger and Christopher Wolfenbarger. And the one thing she'll tell you is that she recalls her mother. And one thing that kind of stood out is she just remembers her mother kind of disappearing one day. And she'll tell you that one of the oddest things that she cannot reconcile is almost immediately after Melissa just vanished, this defendant essentially just removes all of her stuff out of the house. You can see the pictures of mother, the belongings, and things of that nature. It's gone. While she was growing up, she would constantly ask him, "Where's my mother?" And you would expect that you would have heard an answer at some point, some type of explanation, but what she would tell you is that he never answered her question. He never told her I looked for her. He never told her I ever reported her missing. Nothing. In fact, she would tell you that this defendant would tell her while he was growing up that he knows how to get rid of the body. He knows how to not get caught. He also told his daughter, and you will hear this from her mouth, that he had a place to go on the run if he needed to. Now, Christina Wolfenbarger, grew up in basically being cared for by Kathy Wolfenbarger, Christopher Wolfenbarger's biological mother. She lived in the house until she was able to leave when she became an adult. You're going to hear that when she left the house of grandmother and she was able to get out on her own, that's when law enforcement gets that information from her, around 2015, 2017. That information about what he told her while she was growing up. You're going to hear from Dorothy Jones. Now, Dorothy Jones is a resident of that neighborhood at that around that 800 Brooklyn Road area, close to the Action Glass Company where Christopher Wolfenbarger worked, close to the location where Melissa Wolfenbarger's skull was located, close to the location where Melissa Wolfenbarger's remains were located. Dorothy Jones is familiar with that location, and essentially what she's going to tell you is she pretty much hung out with Christopher pretty much every day during that period. She remembers him. She remembers Melissa. She remembers seeing signs of Melissa being abused. She would tell you that she saw Melissa with the black eye herself, that she had been punched in the eye. She's also going to tell you that she's heard them fighting at that house, glass breaking. Probably the most disturbing thing she's going to tell you is that she saw him every day for about a 10-year period. And just one day, Melissa was gone, never saw her again, and Chris was gone. And she said, not only gone, but just kind of left all this stuff. It's in me. You're going to hear about the signs of trauma. There are going to be some photographs that you'll see solely for the purpose of illustrating the tool marks, the mechanical device that was used to disconnect the limbs of Melissa Wolfenbarger. And most importantly, you'll hear this defendant's own statement. During that 1999 period, he told the officers that he was fired because the owners thought he stole a saw. He admits to borrowing it. He admits to using it to cut the top off his car. He never got the saw back. And you'll hear from the anthropologists, the detectives, the medical examiner, that there are signs that Melissa Wolfenbarger's remains have been solved. You also hear about the day he was arrested, 2024. And it did not go like a typical execution of a warrant for a homicide, because it took quite a bit of time to locate this offender. In fact, they didn't locate him in the residence portion of the house. They located him inside area to the garage that was situated for living space. They found him in a something that looks, the evidence will show it has the appearance that it was created for the purpose of hiding. That's what the evidence is going to show. After about 40 to 50 minutes, they get the dogs, and you just can't hide from the dogs, right? The dogs hit, come on out of there. You see, that's what you're going to hear. When he crawls out of there after an hour, and the evidence is going to show he knew exactly who was at his front door. It was your determination, your decision as to why. Possibly for you, it will be clear why. It will be clear. Arrest this defendant for the murder of his wife. Arrest this defendant for dismembering his wife. They were there to arrest him and hold him accountable for taking Melissa Wolfenbarger from her mother and sister, most importantly, her children. At the conclusion of this case, the evidence, testimony, the exhibits, you will be left with one decision, and that's to vote the truth. And I submit to you, the truth will be guilty on both counts of the state indictment for the murder of Melissa Wolfenbarger in 1999.
Thank you.